Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a Friday Reads video where I wrap up the weekend reading and talk about bookish things that have gone on during the week. There have been a lot of bookish things that have been going on. And there are a lot of bookish things that are coming in the world of book prizes. There's so much to talk about in the realm of book prizes in this video, but I'm going to try to fit it all in without making this an unwieldy and long video. We'll see how I do with that because I also finished 2 books this week. And I'm really proud of that because reading continued to be a struggle for me this week. If you follow along, you know we lost our dog Jamie less than a month ago, and it's been a whole grieving process, and we're working through it. It's a process. But I did finish 2 books. They were 2 books that I already had in process when I did my last Friday Reads video, but that's fine. I'm taking the win, and I am working my way through another book. We'll talk about all of those when we get to the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. Now, before we get into book prizes, I do want to just mention one thing. When I filmed my Friday Reads last week, where I talked about just thanking people who had done nice things after we lost Jamie, I had not seen Kim from Middle of the Book March's video where she actually mentioned that Joel and I had lost Jamie, and it was very sweet of her. But there were also a lot of really nice, kind comments on that video as well. So I wanted to extend a thank you to Kim, Middle of the Book March, and anyone who commented on that video as well. I also did a dumb thing. I mentioned Melinda Ott, who had made a donation to the Humane Society in Jamie's name, and how great and thoughtful that was. I didn't make the connection to the channel A Web of Stories. That's on me. I'm going to blame Grief Brain, but I'm going to link her channel as well as Kim's down below and just say thank you. Now, again, there's a lot going on this week. The National Book Award has been announcing its long lists for 2023. And hopefully I managed to film my reaction to the fiction long list, which will be linked down below. I have not seen the long list at the time that I am filming this video because I'm filming this on Thursday. And at this point, they have announced the other categories for the National Book Award: young people's literature, translated literature, nonfiction, and poetry. Of course, I forgot poetry. I don't read a lot of poetry, but yeah, they've announced those. Fiction will be announced tomorrow as I'm filming this, but when you see this, it will be yesterday. So this is Thursday. The announcement is on Friday. Hopefully I will film and upload a reaction to it, and I'll be able to link it down below when this posts on Saturday. Time on the internet is weird. So that's all going on, and the Pulitzer Prizes, I had talked about a potential change a couple of weeks ago in a Friday Reads, and they apparently had their fall meeting and they decided to enact the change. So I will link the article from the New York Times about this down below. I think this is exciting. I think a lot of people took what the potential change was and ran with it. Like, the Pulitzer Prize is not opening up to people who are like based in other countries. This is not like what the Booker did 10 years ago when they allowed American authors in. Like, somebody who lives and is identified as a British author is not going to win the Pulitzer Prize. But they did remove the citizenship requirement. Now, it specifically only says in the books categories, but fiction is one of those books categories, so I'm assuming it qualifies for that. But basically, you can now be a permanent or longtime resident of the United States who is not a citizen and win a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. And this is something that is going to be very interesting. I think it's potentially going to have more of an impact on the nonfiction categories, but it does definitely open things up. It's a good change. They are still keeping the focus on America and American life and American literature, which is only appropriate, I think, for the Pulitzer Prize. I know there are a lot of people who think it's offensive to have an award that's just based on one country, but you know, there are a lot of different book prizes. If you don't like this one, that's fine. There are others for you. It's an interesting change, and it will not be going into effect immediately because they're already in the process of judging books for this year. So it's going to be for the 2025 prize, because the prize they're judging right now is technically the 2024 prize. The Pulitzer is always a year behind. They're judging books for 2023 right now, but it will be announced next year. So it's not going into effect for that one. It's going into effect next year, which will be announced in 2025. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, I'll have the New York Times article down below because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. It's just a new development on the Pulitzer Prize. And since I am kind of, I don't know, am I your guy for the Pulitzer Prizes on the internet? I kind of hope to be, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, since I'm doing this Pulitzer Prize project and I pretend to be an authority on it, I thought I would mention it and wanted to make sure, because I think it's a good change. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And there's a lot more diversity in the American experience that comes from people who are not citizens, but are here. They can certainly add to the American experience and American literature. So I think it's good. Now I have a little cheat sheet that I keep on my desk for book prizes that will be announced for the remainder of the year. The Booker, the National Book Award, and the Nobel. As I said, the National Book Award has already been working through its announcement of its long lists, but it's a short window before the shortlist is announced. October 3rd is when the shortlists will be announced, and at least the one for fiction. And then the winner will be announced on November 15th. So that's coming up. We have the shortlist for the Booker Prize coming on September 21st. That is, I believe, next week. So that's coming and really exciting. And I am going to do a fool's errand for someone who has only read 2 books on the long list, but I'm going to try to do predictions for what will make it. And yeah, we'll talk about the Booker in a little bit. And the Nobel Prize is coming on October 5th. And that is really close. So that's really exciting. And I'll probably do a reaction to the Nobel Prize for Literature this year. I've done one every year that I've had a BookTube channel. I will say, though, it is one of the most frustrating videos that I do every year because it attracts the trolliest comments from people who are basically like, how dare you talk about something on the internet? And, you know, there are uninformed people who talk about things in public places or on the internet, but I feel like reacting to the Nobel Prize is, everybody calm down. So nowadays, when people leave mean comments, I just kind of delete them and leave it at that. But it does create stress and anxiety just to see them and to know that they're coming. So I'll probably still do a reaction. It's fine. I have been having a bit of an existential crisis with book prize reactions. I'm going to continue doing them. Like I said, I will do the Nobel. I'll do a reaction to the shortlist for the Booker Prize. I'll do a reaction for the National Book Award. I think I'm mostly just thinking about how I talk about them, and I haven't really had a chance to sit down and actually think through all of the feelings that I'm having about it because a lot's going on and like grief brain and all that. And it's hard to tell if I'm actually feeling frustrated with the process, especially with things like the Booker Prize, where they invite social commentary on social media commentary, I guess. And it allows people to get really upset really easily about the things that happen with book prizes. And, you know, it's hard to tell if that's what's going on or if like grief brain is just making it really difficult for me to be excited about things. And that, because it is definitely for sure. I will say the book prize season coming and the fact that it's sort of tied to the holidays is starting to get me a little bit excited. We went into Michael's this past weekend and they had their Christmas villages out. I know people don't like when Christmas seeps out this early, but I love it. And it's giving me joy. So let me have this. And because we are heading into this phase of book prize season, it means that we're not far away from year-end best lists, like the New York Times top 10, their 100 notable list. I'm excited about all of those things. So it's getting me back in. But anyway, I can't tell if this malaise I'm feeling about book awards and the sort of complicated feelings I'm having about book prize discussion is an outgrowth of that or what. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Part of it is that people had a really negative reaction to me talking about Demon Copperhead being snubbed when I did my Booker long list reaction. And, you know, the more things like that happen, the more you just feel like maybe I should just not talk about book prizes anymore because it starts to steal the joy from the process. And as my channel name says, this is supposed to be fun. And it sort of takes the fun out when people take it really seriously and just want to chastise you for anything. Now, I kind of got into it, even though I didn't want to get into it. Actually, before we get into the Booker, let me talk about the Kirkus Prize, because someone had pointed out that they had announced their finalists or their shortlist for this year, and I had been intending to do a video about it, and obviously that didn't happen. Grief. I am still struggling to work up enthusiasm for anything really, but for filming videos, and so that never happened. So I figured I'll fit it into this video. So the shortlist for fiction for the Kirkus Prize. Kirkus, by the way, I have found to be a very reliable book reviewer. they're pretty reliable for me. I tend to trust their opinion. So the finalist is Jamel Brinkley's Witness, which I really want to read. I have a hold on it at my library. It sounds fantastic, right up my alley, and I'm really excited to read it. Hopefully I'll be getting it soon. It's a collection of short stories. Eleanor Catton's Burnham Wood, Kelly Link's White Cat, Black Dog, James McBride's The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, Paul Murray's The Bee Sting, which is on the long list for the Booker Prize, and Jessamine Ward's Let Us Descend. Feels like a very solid list. I'm really excited to read Witness. The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store was actually lined up to be my next book when we lost Jamie, and I pivoted away from it because I needed... Well, I haven't really been reading all that much, for one thing, but I still want to get to it, but I had to push it back and move away a little bit. But I still definitely want to read it. I have heard a lot of good things about Burnham Wood. I've also heard some mixed things. It seems to be a bit of a cilantro book. I'm not convinced that I need to read it. Maybe if it continues appearing on lists like New York Times Top 10 of the year, anything like that, maybe by the end of the year I will have changed my mind. But right now I feel like I'm pretty comfortable skipping Burnham Wood. I am familiar with Kelly Link, but I have not read any of her books. I had not even heard of White Cat, Black Dog, but I remember being curious to read a previous book of hers. I read Skippy Dies by Paul Murray and really just didn't like it all that much. So I felt very comfortable passing on The Bee Sting when it was announced, and then it made the long list for the Booker Prize, and I still don't feel convinced. Maybe if it makes the short list, maybe if it wins. A lot will, again, depend on what people talk about. So Burnham Wood and The Bee Sting, I feel pretty comfortable saying I'm not going to read them at this time. Maybe by the end of the year, I will have changed my mind. We'll see. And Let Us Descend, I have already read. I have a review of. I'll link it down below. It's a good book. It's coming out soon, and I'm eager for more people to read it so we can talk about it. That is the Kirkus Prize shortlist. I'll have a link to the article about it because there's a nonfiction list as well. I don't want to spend too much time on it because, again, I really don't want to make this a long and unwieldy video for people, but there's just a lot going on with book prizes right now. We're in that time of year, which is actually kind of exciting. It's gotten me a little bit anticipated. It's stirring up anticipatory feelings, I should say. So let's talk about the Booker long list and do a fool's errand for me. Talk about what might make the shortlist. Now, this is where last year a couple of people called me defensive, but I feel like people get really upset whenever I do reaction videos to a long list that I haven't read or a short list that features books I haven't read. Again, I'm just a dude on the internet talking about things. It's fine. I'm not trying to say that my opinion is the only one that matters, and I can't have formed an opinion about a book that I have not read. So it's fine. But yeah, people get very weird when I talk about things that long lists, short lists, and things that I haven't read. Now, I've only read 2 books on the Booker long list. I had already read If I Survive You when the long list was announced, and I thought it was fine. I didn't love it. And I had already planned to read This Other Eden, so I did read that because this is potentially exciting. No one has won a Pulitzer Prize and a Booker Prize. And actually, one of the things that mystifies me about the anger around Demon Copperhead and people rejoicing that it didn't make the Booker is that people are like, it's won enough. And it's like, when do we feel like that in the rest of the world? Like, would you ever tell Serena Williams, okay, you won the Australian Open, you won the French Open, you need to sit out the US Open? You wouldn't say that. You would cheer her on, hopefully, and think that it's amazing if she won a Grand Slam. It just kind of, it would have been so cool if somebody had won the Women's Prize, the Pulitzer Prize, and the Booker for the same book. Would have been cool. Anyway. And people were surprised when I mentioned in a previous video that no one has won a Pulitzer and a Booker. So obviously there has only been like a 10-year window where Americans have been eligible for the Booker Prize, and it just hasn't happened so far. Eventually, I'm sure it will. I am not convinced that it will probably take a while for a book to win, an author to win for the same book. But Paul Harding has won a Pulitzer, and there's excitement around that for me because somebody's going to be the first, and it's only a matter of time, and he's in the mix, so that's pretty cool. So that's the other one that I've read, and I liked it. I respect it. I would not say I loved this other Eden, but I liked it. So, looking at the reaction from people who have read the long list this year, it's been an interesting thing. So a lot of the books didn't jump out to me as like, I need to get a copy of this right away. And that has happened in previous years. Last year was really excited about The Seven Moons of Molly Almeida. Somehow I still have not read that book, and it won. I was really excited for Girl, Woman, Other the year that it made the long list, and then it ended up co-winning the prize. And there was no book on this list that made me say, I have to get a copy of that right now. And looking at last year's long list, it feels like the tone this year is a lot more muted and a lot more mixed. Because last year, there were books that people didn't quite respond to, or they were definitely cilantro books, like Treacle Walker by Alan Garner. That was a book that some people liked, a lot of people did not like, and a lot of people kind of just said, you know, he's here because he's Alan Garner, and that's fine. But there were a lot of books that people were excited about. Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. A lot of people, myself included, were excited when that made the long list, and especially when it made the short list. Here it is right there. You know, it felt boundary breaking because a novella like that had never made the short list before. It had never made the long list before. So it felt like respect for something that a lot of people like. There are people who don't like Small Things Like These, and that's fine. But it definitely felt like a book that a lot of people loved and were surprised and happy to see in the mix. And a lot of people liked The Colony by Audrey McGee. It ended up not making it onto the shortlist. But there were also discoveries that people hadn't really known about until the long list was announced. After Sappho is a book that a lot of people liked when they read it for the long list last year. People are still recommending After Sappho to me. Actually, most recently, Chelsea from the Montana Book Company. And it's gone from a book that I didn't feel all that excited about to one that I am considering reading at some point in the near future because people keep recommending it to me. And it all comes from the Booker long list. Seven Moons of Molly Almeida was kind of the same thing. A lot of people had not heard of it when the Booker long list was announced last year. But by the time the shortlist was announced, a lot more people had read it and really found themselves liking it. And then it ended up winning. So last year felt like a fun trajectory that you're just not seeing repeated this year. It just feels that a lot of the response to the books has been muted. There isn't any book that people have really coalesced behind at this point, at least. And that's a little disappointing. Maybe things will change once we have the short list. But right now, I from the videos that I've seen, I haven't even seen a book that seems like, oh, a lot of people are liking that. Even the books that trend in that direction, there's still a lot of people who are sort of opposing voices in that. And it's been fun following along, even though a lot of people have been kind of like, this is kind of a mediocre list. And again, that has sort of reinforced my sense of, or my lack of urgency to get to any of these books anytime soon. I've particularly enjoyed Roro Reads and his videos. I enjoy his reviews anyway, but it's been fun following along in his journey, and he played a game for a lot of the books called Burnham Copperhead, where he would answer the question, like, is this book better than Burnham Wood or Demon Copperhead? For most of the books, I think maybe even all of them, the answer was no. Burnham Wood and Demon Copperhead being, of course, among the two biggest snubs for the Booker this year. Anyway, I'll link his channel down below with some of the others, just because it's a fun channel if you haven't already discovered it. Anyway, it's just going to be really interesting to see how things play out once the shortlist is announced, because maybe once we have a shortlist, there will be a book that people will coalesce around and root for and will drum up some excitement, because it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of excitement about this list right now. I have looked at a bunch of reviews. I have considered authors and their standing or stature and history with the prize before, and I would say there are 3 books that seem like a pretty sure bet to make it onto the shortlist. We'll see if I'm right or wrong based on this. And again, yeah, I've only read 2 of these books, but you can measure the odds of something happening without having read the books. You can just get a sense of the discourse, and it's a whole thing. Anyway, the 3 books that I think have the most solid case for the shortlist seem to be The House of Doors by Tan Tuan Eng, The Bee Sting by Paul Murray, and Old God's Time by Sebastian Barry. Part of me is almost wondering if this whole long list is a way of sort of stacking the deck for Sebastian Barry, who has been in the mix before and is an author of incredible stature and an author that people generally seem to like. So part of me, maybe being cynical, wants to think that maybe that's the case. I don't know. It does feel like in the past there has been a stacked deck with the Booker. It feels like with the Testaments by Margaret Atwood, that was always going to win. The only surprise is that it ended up tying with Girl, Woman, Other. But yeah, so part of me wonders if this whole long list is just to make a case for Sebastian Barry. And the response to the book seems positive enough that that could be the way things play out. But it'll be interesting to see the way things go. The Bee Sting feels more mixed, but the people who like that book love that book. And the fact that it made it onto the long list would imply that the jury is a fan. So maybe that'll go in that way. People keep referring to The House of Doors as a very traditional Booker book, and Tan Tuan Eng has been in the mix before. So there seems to be definitely a case that could be made for him and for this book. So those feel like the three surest bets for the shortlist to me. And I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. Beyond that, I think it's very likely that they will be joined by This Other Eden by Paul Harding. Again, not much enthusiastic response to that book. I feel like even people who like that book don't necessarily love it. They're kind of in the camp of me where it's like, oh, I respect that book. I liked it. I didn't love it. But I think it's enough for him to make it onto the shortlist. So ultimately, he probably won't be the first person to win a Pulitzer and a Booker based on the sort of muted reaction to it. But I think he's going to make it onto the shortlist. And so there's a chance that he will be the first. We'll have to just wait and see. So that leaves 2 slots. Roro Reads actually recently pointed out, I don't know why I hadn't noticed this, but a lot of the books on the long list feature someone whose parent died, or they're grieving a parent or loss of a parent. And it just hadn't occurred to me. So part of me wants to say, well, if that's such a prevalent story in here, maybe like Western Lane will jump onto here and surprise. Maybe Pearl. But I don't know. I feel like Prophet Song by Paul Lynch has been very cilantro, more than the ones that I say are the surest things. However, I think I'm going to put it on my short list. I think it'll make it because, again, the people who like it seem to really like it. And that makes a pretty strong case for something. And then that only leaves 1 spot left. And that's 5 men. I don't think it's going to be a shortlist that's entirely composed of men. So, but even before I realized that, I had been thinking A Spell of Good Things by Ayobami Adebayo. So I'm just going to go with that. And we'll see. So my shortlist prediction is The House of Doors, The Bee Sting, Old God's Time, This Other Eden, Prophet Song, and A Spell of Good Things. And we'll see. There's always an upset. So one of those, at least one of those books is likely to not make it. I'll be lucky if I get half, honestly. We'll see. But that's my prediction for what will make the Booker shortlist. I'd love to hear what you think will make the shortlist, or what you're just thinking of the shortlist in general in the comment section down below. Let's move to the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. So the first book that I finished this week was Roman Stories by Jhumpa Lahiri. I still took my time with it. This is definitely a book that, outside of like Grief Brain, I would have finished very quickly. It's a collection of short stories. It's not released yet. It comes out in October. I can't wait for more people to read it. I loved this book a lot. I had spent a lot of time talking about it, and the last 50 pages of the book really just stuck with everything that I had already talked about. I did get a comment, and I'm sorry, I meant to write down the person's name before I started filming, and I didn't. But he is Italian and had commented about racism in Italy as something that is an outgrowth of xenophobia. And that very much, I mean, I would never say he's wrong because he is actually Italian and I'm not. But it does definitely line up with what I have heard about the experience of race or racism in Italy, because it's a lot of people are coming into the country, and the fear by a lot of people in Italy is that it is changing the dynamic of the country. and there's a resistance to that. So it's a really interesting, beautifully written book. I really can't wait for people to read it. And again, everything I said last week is still true now. So I'm just going to link my Friday reads from last week down below. It's a beautiful book. I can't wait for more people to read it. The last line of the book is, I thought it was great. I got such a kick out of it. It's a really interesting love letter to Rome and to Italy and to Italian culture, because it sees all of the things that is good about it, but it also it understands the flaws as well. And it's not afraid of calling them into the light so other people can see them, and hopefully so people can begin to reckon with them. Roman Stories, Jhumpa Lahiri, fantastic book. I would absolutely recommend it. If you have it pre-ordered, fantastic. I can't wait to discuss it with more people when it comes out. The other book I managed to finish was The Raging Storm by Anne Cleeves. This is the third book in the Matthew Venn series. Technically, there's a short story that is set between book 2 and book 3. So if you count that, it's not book... Anyway, I don't count that one. It was exactly what I needed, which is a diversion, something I didn't quite need to pay attention to because I'm having a focus problem. And I talked about that a lot last week. So I admit I didn't pay the greatest attention to the audio of this book, but I really appreciated everything that it did. The ending was pretty, I thought it was kind of fun and interesting. I think Anne Cleeves' books are not without flaws, but they have been fun diversions for me. The only one I really just abjectly did not like was one of her earliest books, if not her first book, which was from the 90s. She's definitely grown as a writer since then. And I still appreciate the Matthew Venn books. I think they're a series that I would continue to follow in the future, assuming that she will write another one of them. So the premise of this is that there is this man who's a famous explorer named Jem Roscoe. He is originally from this sort of small town, fishing village in the UK, and he comes back to the town unexpectedly one day and shows up in the pub. And he keeps coming back every night, and when people ask what he's doing in town, he says he's waiting to meet someone. And he won't reveal who. He'll just evasively say he's waiting to meet someone. And then one day, he doesn't show up at the pub. And then they find his body out in a storm, naked in a boat in the storm the next day. So, of course, the assumption is that whoever he was waiting to meet is the person who killed him, Matthew Venn, and his two officers, Jen Rafferty and Ross May. I always forget Ross's last name, but I think it's May. What's interesting about them is that they don't necessarily get along. There's a bit of like resentment of Matthew Venn as the boss and who has authority over them. And especially with Ross, since he is ambitious himself and comes from a family, he's sort of, it's like Nepo baby of the police department. But there's an interesting dynamic. There's tension between the three of them. It's not just that they are friends who get along all the time investigating together. It makes it interesting to follow as the series goes along. They sort of camp out in this small town to investigate, and everything spins out from there. And Matthew Venn is gay. What I like about these books is that it's so matter-of-fact about him being gay. It's not treated like a big deal. And Cleeves absolutely does not sexualize him, which I feel like is something that happens when someone is gay. They just get very hypersexual and sexualized, and Anne Cleeves does not do that, and I really appreciate that. He is married to a man, and it's treated just matter-of-factly, and I really appreciate that as well. So if you're into traditional mystery thrillers, I could recommend this to you. It's not like the Gone Girl school of mystery thrillers, which is so common nowadays and which I get really frustrated with. So it was a nice escapist read for me. I have been working on Rabbit Run by John Updike, and I've been hating this book. I will tell you that much. I am going to hold a lot of my thoughts on this until I finish it. I'm doing this as a buddy read with Danny, who is that bookish bear on Instagram. So at the point where I left off, we're roughly halfway through at this point. Harry Rabbit Angstrom, who is the protagonist of this book and of its sequels, seems potentially poised for an awakening I don't think that he's going to have. So he's awful. he is absolutely terrible. He is a horrible person. I have wanted to throw this book across the room multiple times because of things he said, the ways he treated people. You know, I have this index card. I have been trying to track all of the pages where he or John Updike, as the narrator of the book, say something misogynistic or offensive to women or insulting to a woman. And it's like every page almost. It's a lot. And it's a lot. And again, it's not just Harry. It's also the voice that is telling us the story that is really just awful toward women. There's homophobia, there's racism. But the reason I want to wait until I'm done with the book is that it's unclear at this point if that's the point or if it's critique of those things. Like, I'm going to give this book the benefit of the doubt, even though from the things I have heard about the sequels, the benefit of the doubt is probably a waste of time. But I'm going to give it that sense of grace. Maybe it will shock me and prove me wrong, but I'm not liking it. I'm not liking it. I am not liking it. All of my worst fears about John Updike as a writer are being realized right now. And I've also been researching into him because he is a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner for later books in the Rabbit series. So I have been researching critical reaction to his work as a sort of build up to a Pulitzer deep dive on him. And people just fawn over him, which is kind of surprising, kind of alarming, given the content of the books. And yeah, so more to come on this, because again, I'm hating it so far. I hate everything that it represents. I hate the character. I hate the way the narrative voice of the book treats women and talks about things. I hate a lot of the description. Like, people talk about John Updike being a revolutionary writer, and I think he was really just revolutionary for sex. It's hard to say, though, because, I mean, the writing style, to me, is not all that different from J.D. Salinger. However, I'd say J.D. Salinger is better. And it definitely feels like a contemporary novel, but maybe it feels like a contemporary novel just because he sort of, like, this was published in 1960. And the fact that there's so much sex in here is shocking for that. But the description is not great. At one point, he actually says it echoed like an echo chamber. And it's kind of like, yeah. So I'm not all that impressed with John Updike right now, but I'm going to hold off until I'm done. That's what I'll tell you so far. But I'm going to wait to see what the second half of this book is like, and more to come on that. Anyway, that is my Friday reads for this week. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the book or book prizes in general, the Kirkus Prize, the National Book Award, what you've been reading, what you've been watching. Great British Bake Off is coming back soon. I'm really excited about that. And all that, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.